Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. It's time for this week's One Last Thing with co-host Slava Cooperstein. Slava, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ken. How are you?
No complaints. We're back from London. Long trip, a little bit of time to assess what's going on here with the team and talk about, after 6 games, what have been some of the biggest positive surprises and some of the biggest negative frustrations as well. I want to start with the good news or the bad news on this?
We can start with the good news. Get people feeling good before we bring down the other shoe, right?
All right. So each made a list of 5 things, more or less in order. I wasn't really too careful about my order, to be honest. But start us off. Who's the number? What's your number 5 surprise on the positive side?
Yeah, my number 5 surprise is Zay Flowers, which is, maybe surprising to some, just given the fact that he was a first-round pick and he did come in with fairly high expectations. But I sort of viewed it from the perspective of, wide receiver is one of the hardest positions to acclimate, and when you're entering into the NFL from the college ranks, and Zay Flowers being at Boston College, really being the only real option there, you kind of wondered. How good he was going to be right off the bat. But boy, has he, I think, blown everybody's expectations out of the water. I mean, he has been, aside from the Steelers game, which was a notable exception, he's been sure-handed. He's been creating after the catch. He has really been, he's succeeded in pretty much every area of the field, and he has really not shied away from contact, been a really physical, capable receiver. And I'm just thrilled with what he's brought to the table.
Yeah, big difference from Marquise Brown in that respect, in terms of both smaller guys. I think Flowers is built a little bit more solidly and physically. I probably should have had Flowers on my list, is what I'm going to first start by saying. But it's kind of been boiling the frog for me with Flowers' expectations, meaning they got really high. Watching after the draft, to get a deeper look into who he was, and then seeing him work with Lamar prior to the camp, then come to camp and just be this separation machine where you saw video after video, or you saw in person, in my case, time after time, where he just leaves people in the dust. The cornerbacks can't stay with him. They make it out like the biggest deal of all when Kayvon Seymour covers him and basically holds him right at the line of scrimmage to do it. It's been an increasing thing. Then we saw him in the preseason play well. We saw him come out right on the first game, get about 10 targets. I think might have been 9 catches on 10 targets, or it was thereabouts. So it's been kind of an expectation level that by the beginning of the season was already very high. And so I didn't include him in it, but I probably should have, because all the things you said. I mean, he's a receiver. If you look at all the others, Ravens first round wide receivers, they've all had trouble acclimating to the NFL, and it's often been a matter of years or not at all, but not generally in the first game or two. Torrey Smith is about the only guy who very quickly acclimated to NFL, and even him, it took till game 3, and then he had touchdowns on his first 3 catches in that game. But I think I like your selection. He could have even been higher, and I almost feel bad for not having him, especially considering who my number 5 guy is, and that's Nelson Aguilar, who honestly I was very down on the entire trade for him. 6th round draft pick seemed like way too much to give up, in addition to the money, for a guy who was in the bottom of many metrics across the league. But he's been a much better player than he was last year. And then he has since, I think, his season at Oakland a few years ago, or Las Vegas, when he had a pretty damn good yards per target number. So he's looking more like that receiver than the guy he has been the last couple of years. And that's been a big positive.
Yeah, well, so to your point, I mean, I actually have Nelson Aguilar as my number 4 guy, and the reason is, I mean, he's really it's performance relative to expectation, right? Mm-hmm. I think many of us shared the opinion that Nelson Aguilar, it was sort of unfortunate at what was going on with the Ravens at the time that he was acquired, because I think that made people more down on him. We hadn't re-signed Lamar, we hadn't drafted Zay, we hadn't gotten OBJ, so everybody was like, this is your big wide receiver move. So, but obviously he was just one of many. But even still, he has really outperformed expectations. I think, my thought process was Nelson Aguilar is going to be either, one of the best number 4, number 5 receivers in the NFL. I think he's comfortably our number 2 receiver, excluding Andrews, just talking about the wide receiver room, and behind Zay Flowers. And he's sort of like, I think he's outperformed his contract in a way that makes you feel a little bit better about having to overpay for Odell Beckham. And we've talked it to death about the reasons that, you might want to overpay for an Odell Beckham, but he's really, he's been a real positive and sure-handed, and somebody that Lamar Jackson can rely on.
The sure-handedness in particular, complete flip from a lot of his career, by the way. Not a sure-handed guy at all, and particularly not last year. I'll go on and move on to my number 4 guy, Jadeveon Clowney. Terrific pressure machine. The Ravens, I've said many times on this show and the other film study shows that it's basically compound pressure is how the Ravens get sacks. They lead the NFL in sacks, and a lot of those initial pressures are coming from Clowney, but he's also been a reasonable cleanup guy, in particular this last game when he had 2, and just been exactly what the Ravens needed in terms of filling a gaping hole at outside linebacker with the injuries to Bowser, Owe, and Ajabo piling up. He and Van Noy have just been a remarkable pairing. So Clowney, they don't need to get anything against the run for him, and I hope as the season moves on, it's going to be a case where they really try hard to maintain his freshness as a pass rusher. Even though he has some ability against the run, he can do some good things there. I really like the fact that, for instance, a player like Harrison is taking a lot of the snaps on that side against the run.
Yeah, I'll just keep on Clowney since he's the number 2 on my list. I mean, Clowney is performing so well that I think relative to expectation, he could be one of the best pickups. Free agent pickups of the last decade for the Ravens. I mean, he's been phenomenal. He's been an edge setter. I mean, immediately, after picking him up, I think you've got a reduction in runs bouncing out to the outside. He has been much more explosive in pass rush than I would have expected. I mean, you see him bursting into the backfield on a regular basis. Marlon Humphrey likes to joke about him being Mr. Almost, and there's some truth to that. But he got on the stat sheet this last week. I think it's just going to keep improving throughout the season, and he's really steadied that outside linebacker position to the point that I think at some point this season, the Ravens may want to consider, possibly extending him if they can get a reasonable offer, because Clowney's just fit in perfectly, and he's been a force multiplier, I think, for this team.
Yeah, it's an interesting prospect. I don't know if there's a good price that the Ravens can get him at. I think he's probably a $10 million a year man next year, and it might be a 3-year deal. 3 for 30, 3 for 36 somewhere. That he ends up getting. So it may be another player that we have to say goodbye to, which is part of the problem with signing free agents at all, and 1-year free agents is prove-it deals are great for not getting stuck with the old maid, but they're really bad in terms of solving any multi-year issues that you have. And the Ravens do kind of have a multi-year issue at edge, even if they have Bowser, Owe, and Ajabo all still on the team in 24.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about that is that we got Clowney, I think, at a better price than we initially expected, and he's had some pretty bad experiences throughout this sort of like mercenary time in his career, and to the point where with the Browns and stuff, he's like, I don't even want to talk about it. Like he may be tired of doing this year to year, but I can understand if somebody says no to the money. I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it will be interesting. He certainly has kind of a rep, but I think he's basically fixing it this year. He was just on the podium yesterday and talking about how much he loves coming to Baltimore and loves driving up to work. Part of me says being a 3-4 edge, and obviously the Ravens play a lot of 4-2-5, so the Ravens are often in nickel, but they also are in base some. And when they're in base and Clowney is on the field, he's getting a chance to rush from a little further outside than he has before, which probably suits him a little bit better than, getting a guy in space is something still he can work with very effectively in terms of getting the backfield. Probably also helps him set the edge a little better. So sure. It's a good system for him.
Yeah, definitely. So is it my number 3 now? Is that
your number 3? Yes.
Okay. Yeah, my number 3 is Patrick Queen. I think it's a real testament to how well Patrick Queen's played this season. I was very high and bullish on how I thought he was going to perform, and he has exceeded all of my expectations. He's improved in every facet of the game. He's become an incredibly sure tackler, aside from the a couple times where he decides that he wants to blow somebody up instead of wrapping up. He has improved in coverage. He's sideline to sideline. I mean, he's tremendously quick, and he's really stood on his own as a playmaker. I think it's very obvious that Roquan takes on like a lot more responsibility for getting the defense set and everything like that, but Queen is just really maximizing that to the fullest with his splash plays. He bet on himself this season. I think he knew that he could really secure a great contract for him, and that's the attitude he went into the offseason and into this year, and it's paying off and it's showing on the field.
Yeah, I agree. I probably should have had Patrick Queen on my list, honestly, but it's a crowded list. Of players. Nelson Aguilar could have gone for Patrick Queen. I did want to have somebody from the offense. Everything else I have is from the defense, because most of the positives this year have, frankly, been defensively for the Ravens. But Patrick Queen would have, is a very reasonable choice. I'm glad you selected him. Improvement as a tackler, improvement in recognition, improvement in awareness on the field, particularly in pass defense. He's probably reading the quarterback a little bit better, but he's definitely reading the routes that are in front of him better. And I think he's probably got more awareness of what's going on behind him. We've seen some plays this year. I talked about one on the defensive pod this week, where Queen had all in one play. He had a recognition component, a reading the quarterback component, a getting to the spot quickly, decisiveness component, and then a tackling component that were all way at a higher level than he would have had any time in his previous 3 years. And you look at Queen's development, and it has been a slow one, but it has really paid off, I think, for the Ravens in terms of year 5. And they probably right now are questioning the decision of whether or not they extend him for that 5th year, and really thinking about, I don't know if we made the right call, but the best you can hope for in these kind of situations is the guy has a great year, gets a huge contract somewhere else, and gets you the 3rd round comp pick, which I think is a possibility with Queen.
Yeah, if his play continues at this rate, I think that's a very realistic possibility. He could be entering similar to Roquan territory.
Yeah, I would agree on that. My number 3 guy is Justin Madubuike. Very down on him at the beginning of the year, lots of penalties to start, and he has really turned it around. And in particular, the last game in London, the best game of his career, had a number of outstanding run defense plays where he is standing up and shedding a player at the line of scrimmage like I've really never seen him do before, at least not frequently in his time. He's more of a penetrator. And standing up somebody and shedding him, that kind of sounds like penetration in a way, but it's really more of a he's decisively moving to the correct side once he determines that. So it has more of a 2-gapping nature to it. But then also what he's done as a pass rusher is just ridiculous. His pad level is great. He's getting underneath these offensive linemen. Honestly, the Tennessee offensive line is not that bad. It's not a group that is just terrible on the inside. They've got Brunskill at right guard, who he kind of used like a sock puppet in this game, is a guy who played very versatilely for the 49ers at a number of positions, including left tackle, I believe, there when they had people out. Very much like a Patrick McCary is for the Ravens. And on the other side, Brewer at center was a guy he beat a couple times. and also Skaronski, who's a rookie but playing pretty well at left guard. I mean, it's not a bad group at all, and he made him really look bad. In fact, he also played a little bit on the edge in this game and had some work against the tackles, stunted like crazy, had the quickness to do things, had good underneath picks, just a lot of very positive things from Madubuike this game. And right now, second among all interior defensive linemen in sacks with 4.5. Only Chris Jones has more.
Yeah, I mean that last stat is a pretty excellent one. Madubuike, just like a lot of these guys, he could have made my list. I think Madubuike is more or less on balance meeting my expectations. I was very high on him, and I think the Ravens, from the beginning made the assessment that they were going to be priced out of the Madubuike sweepstakes. I mean, who knows whether they offered him something and he turned them down. And so they went to Washington, but I think he's having the season that we hoped he would, and that's not a bad thing at all. So I totally understand his inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, my number 2 was Clowney, so I guess we can go to your number 2.
Okay, well, my number 2 is Geno Stone, and it's a very limited sample size in terms of what Geno has done, but Geno has also been the special teams captain that they need. The other guy who could have gone in this spot or on the list at all was Malik Harrison, who I think is having a fantastic year, but Geno has just done more in terms of 3 really big picks. You look at when these picks occurred during these games. The pick against Cincinnati was absolutely enormous in terms of making sure that Cincinnati did not get back in that ball game. The same thing against Tennessee in terms of it being at a critical juncture in the game. I think they were up 18-13 at the time, and his interception allowed the Ravens to go up 21-13 after the return. And I may have that wrong, but I think that's correct. I'm trying to think of when his other interception occurred, but it's just he's been exactly the guy the Ravens want as a free safety and hope they were drafting in 2020. A guy who can play loose bracket and undercut both, but he's not a go to the body free safety, which is honestly Deshaun Elliott. I really liked him as a player, but that was his big weakness in the NFL was everything. He had to go to the exact center of mass of that opponent and try and dislodge it from the other 2 sections of his body, top and bottom. And that's just not a useful technique at free safety. It's not it'll serve you okay at strong safety, but or at dime back, but it's really not the way you want to play free safety. And Stone embodies what the Ravens have done very well and what we're going to lead into in terms of my number 1 item.
Yeah, Geno Stone obviously could have made this list as well. I think largely he is performing to the level that I was expecting based on his trajectory last season, but he has developed something of a clutch gene throughout this first, 1/3 of the season. And tell me a better free safety that we've drafted than him over the past,
since 2002.
Yeah, exactly, right. I mean, everybody else has been sort of either Kyle Hamilton, who's not really a free safety, although he can do anything. I'm far be it from me to suggest that Kyle Hamilton can't do anything, but he's probably going to spend the majority of his career at the strong safety and nickel positions because that's where he can really wreck a game. But everybody else, has been sort of like somebody who's just masquerading, a strong safety masquerading as a free safety. So, Geno Stone has been excellent. I would love to be able to figure out somehow to retain him, but we've got a few decisions to make this upcoming season. So, we'll see what happens.
It would really have to be an in-season extension, and I think Geno is at a point right now where he'll be betting on himself. It almost would take a down few weeks. Some things to go wrong, the missed tackles maybe to persist because he had a couple in this last game. To normalize his expectations or to regress his expectations to a point where he says, you know what, maybe I ought to take it safe and take $15 million or whatever be over 3 years from the Ravens.
Yeah, we'll see. Stranger things have happened, but he has a bright future ahead of him, regardless of where he plays. So that goes to my number one. This is, cheating a little bit because it just lets us talk about a bunch of people. But Mike McDonald is my number one positive surprise. Not that he didn't have a great season last season, but he has really shown an incredible ability to adapt, to put his players in a position to succeed, and really just take his own coaching hubris, ego, whatever, out of the equation entirely. He came into the season. He said, okay, where are our best assets in the defense? And very clearly, it's at middle linebacker and at the safety position. So how do we use those to their maximum ability to basically create the smothering defense that we've seen over the past 6 weeks? And the answer to that has been the cover two that we've been seeing all the time, right? The safeties are able to protect the cornerback room, which right now doesn't have a single star, in my opinion. Because
including Humphrey,
because Marlon Humphrey isn't Marlon Humphrey yet. He's probably playing at 70% of Marlon Humphrey, and everybody else has performed very admirably. But you can't tell me that Brandon Stevens and Ronald Darby are stars yet. They need to do it consistently over a longer period of time, and so the safeties are helping them. The linebackers are taking on a tremendous amount of responsibility. And the number of people that we've just been able to plug and play with, free safeties and free agents and practice squad elevations, and everybody just seamlessly fit in is just a testament to what an excellent job Mike McDonald has done.
You've done a really good job saying this, and I won't add too much to this. I have the exact same thing. Mike McDonald's scheme covers for lack of CB quality. What's amazing about it is the guys they've plugged in at safety and the willingness to take a risk there, even when the cornerback room is in trouble. So the cornerback room is in trouble. You don't really have a slot corner after Ardarius Washington went down. You have the guys on the outside. There really isn't anybody there you'd want to move to slot corner. They didn't want to move Stevens there, even though he might be able to kind of do it. I don't think they wanted to move a player like Darby there, even though he might be small enough. It's just he's not a change of direction guy in the same way. Yasin, a physical corner that you really wouldn't want there. Humphrey, a guy you could move him to the slot. It's a waste, in my opinion. And also right now it might be a mismatch of skill set too. So anyway, he comes up with moving Hamilton back to safety, even though that vacates the other split safety role, which has held the defense together for the first couple of weeks, and he puts back Daryl Worley in that position. And Daryl Worley was a stud playing split field safety for the Ravens. He made all the tackles he was supposed to make, no big coverage mistakes. And just look at the long plays the Ravens haven't given up this year. And basically they've given up very, very few long plays in the passing game. And you see exactly, how this cover two has forced opposing quarterbacks to keep that ball, short. And when they've tried to throw it deep, they've had a lot of problems doing it. And look at Joe Burrow 0 for 7 with interception in the game on throws of 15 plus yards. So it's been a remarkable defense put together. You mentioned the linebackers too. I think that's a great point in there is their additional responsibility, awareness, and understanding, and particularly in the passing game. And transitioning, from pass to run possibilities has been outstanding. It's just the awareness of what's going on behind them has helped as well, and they are coming downhill like banshees in terms of negating opportunities for Yak.
Yeah, this has been the best team defense that we've seen, I think, in years, and obviously there is talent on the defense, but it's very concentrated in particular areas, and oftentimes offenses in the NFL make their hay by attacking the weak link. And when the entire cornerback room could be seen as a weak link, we've managed to as a team to be able to really cover for that. And I think that's just remarkable in this day and age of offense.
Yeah, I remarkable, and some of it's done with scheme. I mean, Roquan is a great player, and so you can say the linebackers taking more responsibility. Yes, absolutely. Queen, great player. Whoever they've had at free safety, whether it's Stone or Marcus Williams for a little bit, as we would have hoped, probably really at the beginning of the season more than anything. They've had great players back there, but they've also had Daryl Worley at the other split safety role, and they've had a bunch of edge players of some real questionable ability to rush the passer who've been taking up a lot of snaps with the combination of Harrison, who's been very good against the run, and Robinson, who has not been particularly outstanding at anything, honestly, so far. So you have, I think it's remarkable the way this has been held together.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, can't say enough about Mike McDonald, but we do have to let the people go sometime.
Well, let's move on, and we'll talk about the biggest frustrations. I'm going to start on the frustration side, and you can follow up. My number 5 frustration right now is Kevin Zeitler, off to a very tough start, and did not play well the first 3 games. Improved a little bit. It had a really good game in week 5 against the Steelers, which was his best of the season, and then took another step back, unfortunately, in the game in London, and just had a lot of trouble. Now, the Titans have a talented interior. He got Simmons some, he got Petco some, he got others, but it is not enough there to explain some of the problems he had as a pass blocker. He's really not had the anchor he used to. Still is a very, very astute lineman. He knows what he's supposed to do, and he usually can go and get to a spot. He does not seem to have the anchor anymore as a pass blocker, and it's a real concern. And I think they probably will end up parting ways at the end of this year. I had hopes that Zeitler would have a huge year and demand a contract somewhere else that would generate a comp pick. Of course, I think it's more likely, honestly, that Zeitler will be working on a 1-year prove-it deal somewhere next year, and it is even possible he could come back to the Ravens on a 1-year deal, I suppose, if things continue. But our best hope is that he plays somewhere approximately the level he did against the Steelers for a lot of the games the remainder of the year, and can finish strong at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're looking for positives on Zeitler, you look to the quality of the opposition that we faced thus far. Some pretty tremendous defensive lines, whether it's Cleveland or Pittsburgh or the Colts or the Titans. It's definitely not slouches in terms of opposition. And there's been some inconsistency in terms of the health on the offensive line, and that's including the 2 players that Zeitler plays between, Linderbaum and Morgan Moses. So hopefully, in the next couple games will be some get right games. Although the Lions D line has played pretty well, so that'll be quite a litmus test for him. But couldn't disagree with you having him on your list. So my number 5 player is Travis Jones. I guess Travis Jones, I don't think has been terrible by any stretch, but I think when we were looking at the departure of Calais Campbell, I think we were really hoping that Travis Jones would be one of these players that would eat into a share of the snaps lost by Calais Campbell. And one of my biggest concerns on the defensive side is just the defensive line's ability to rotate and keep players fresh for the December and hopefully during the playoffs. And Travis Jones just really hasn't been demanding to be given more snaps with his level of play. And I think that's a real shame, because I think we all had pretty high hopes for him.
Absolutely. Coming out of the preseason, I certainly did. And it's unfortunate that it hasn't worked out as well in the regular season. I still think, the Brent Urban injury is a lot bigger than people realize. They only played 46 snaps on defenses last week. That allowed them to keep people fresh. It's very important that they not get into games where they are playing a lot of base defense, And that will be the case if they have to catch up in games. But they play a lot of base defense and are forced to overwork their defensive linemen more. Matabike led the whole defensive line with 37 snaps this last week. And that's okay. I'd even rather he have less than that, but that's okay. But what is not ideal is that this Urban injury could have been an opportunity for the Ravens to pick up anyone at any tech along the line. So we'll see if this is serious, first of all. Hopefully Urban can come back and play because his 20 or so snaps per game are very valuable to the Ravens. He gives them exactly what they need. He's played well. He's done what they need. But if they did lose Urban, they have to go out and get a defensive lineman. I don't think Bravion Roy is the guy who they have on the practice squad. He's a fourth-year player. I think they might go to the market, find someone, and I think they could actually get a 1, a 3, or a 5 to fill the role if you could get Travis Jones to take a 3 and have Washington take more of that 5 role. I think you could have a very amoeba-like movement on the line to fill with basically any replacement they could get. They may not feel like they want another nose tackle, but it might really not be a bad choice at all if that's the best player out there. So they have some ability at the trade deadline. I think it is kind of one of their needs is they have some thinness at that position. Still have some injury risk there. I think we'd have to say with Michael Pierce, who hasn't been healthy the last few years, is playing freaking great football.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up for breakfast, lunch, and dinner with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Guys, I've shared moving. I was using this for all my meals. Now I'm working from home. Guess what? Microwaves in the other room. I'm using this for all my meals. Factor is how I get through my lunch day every day. But they've got breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I haven't tried the breakfast ones yet, but why not? I think I might add that to my next order. But I love them for lunch. Plus, they've got new autumn fall flavors out right now for limited time, featuring seasonal veggies like cranberry, pecan chicken, and apple Dijon pork chops. And again, just like everything else, they're ready in just 2 minutes. They'll satisfy your fall cravings during this busy season without the hassle. So go ahead and level up with Gourmet Plus options as well. Prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccoli, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Head to factormeals.com/Ravens50 and use the code Ravens50 to get 50% off. That's code Ravens50 at factormeals.com/Ravens50 to get 50% off your Factor meal today.
All right now, but makes you worried a little bit, that he'll be able to finish the season.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think defensive line, I think interior defensive line is a position where you can really get a lot of value out of somebody who's not really you don't need a stud, right? You don't need somebody who's going to be like, a 3-down guy. You just need somebody to eat up some of these snaps. Yeah. And if you're a competent run stopper, I think that could really do a lot for the Ravens. So I think it's your number 5.
Oh, is it? I did Zeitler as number 5.
And I'm sorry. Yeah. So then it's your number 4 then.
My number 4, Ronnie Stanley. So, we had high hopes. One of the things about the off season entirely has been just how healthy the offensive line was through camp. And, there were a couple of revelations during the preseason that weren't positive in terms of Salah and then the play of Fa'alele, both in the preseason and during the regular season after that it's just not been – it's still at a developmental level. Let's just leave it at that to say that Salah was not as advertised. They basically, I think, put Salah in at left guard because they wanted to light a fire under Simpson. And Ronnie Stanley actually has been a guy who didn't play a lot. And he may not have played at all in terms of a padded practice during camp or preseason. I know he didn't play in either of the practices against the Commanders. He didn't play in any of the games, and he didn't play in most of the padded practices. If he slipped into one, it's possible he might have been there for the first, but I think he might have missed them all, and that meant he started the season, and then of course. He's injured again. Does make it back, which is very fortunate, but has really not played well at all so far. Not certainly a Ronnie Stanley level that we'd be hoping for. This last game was his best, so that's something to really look at. I graded it out as a C here in terms of what he did. Still a fair number of pressures allowed. They're of the positive thing to look at is that they're of the typical Ronnie Stanley type where he's mirroring very well and keeping that edge rusher from the blind side from getting his hands on Lamar or knocking him down. But he compensates by giving ground, and I think the giving ground has become worse with his ankle in the current state. We're not seeing as good mobility from him in terms of getting to level 2 and making blocks. That was something he could do in his sleep, it seemed like, when he was a top mobile left tackle, in 2019 and early 2020. So it's been frustrating return for Ronnie, and I certainly hope he gets healthier and can play better as the season goes on, because the Ravens really need him to.
Yeah, I certainly considered putting Ronnie Stanley on my list. I just made an internal decision to take injuries sort of out of my equation, because you can't really necessarily control those. I do sort of question the approach that the Ravens took with Stanley in terms of not getting him any play during either the preseason or the or throughout training camp, because I just think that having your earliest live fire be against really quality defensive lines like the ones that we've had, I think that is a bit of a recipe for disaster. I mean, you have to ramp up, and I don't know that the strategy of ramping up throughout the regular season is the right one. And I don't know that we have any information to suggest that Stanley was injured or had re-aggravated anything in the beginning. I just think that they were, wrapping him in bubble wrap. So if I'm mistaken, I'll take it. But
I can't speak to that really, and I don't like speaking to injuries anyway. But I will say, from Harbaugh's perspective, there may have been asymmetric risk, and when you look at what happened to Dobbins, for example, not this year, but in the beginning of 22 when he was hurt in the preseason. The questions you come up and they have much more negative implications is, why the hell am I even playing in the preseason? Dobbins is even saying, if that's the case, you probably want to try something different anyway in terms of preventing the injuries. You want Ronnie Stanley to basically be in control of his own destiny in terms of when he plays and when he doesn't. I mean, it's very important that the Ravens try and get Ronnie back on the field, but also on his own timetable so that he can play his contract as effectively as possible. Obviously, the Ravens are paying him a lot of money. There's no way they could get out of this year. There is a way they can get out of next year, but it's still such a barrier. I don't think it's going to end up happening. It's just very important to play the long game still with Ronnie Stanley. At least think about the terminus of his contract being no earlier than the end of 24.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all I can say is, I hope Ronnie Stanley's playing for us next year, and I hope that we're thrilled about it.
Yeah.
So, moving on to my number 4 is Devin Duvernay, which is kind of a funny one to add 1 week after he has a 70-yard return. This really doesn't have to do with the quality of Devin Duvernay's play. It's really more his usage and sort of the team's philosophy on it. I mean, we paid $4 million to retain this guy, and we could have saved it. I was all for it, provided that he was going to be sort of a valuable part of this offense, but we really haven't used him like that. I don't know how much that is on. Some of it's on Lamar not targeting him. Some of it's on Monken not scheming things out to him. But you and I have talked about this multiple times. Zay Flowers' average depth of target is very low. Yeah. And Zay Flowers is also being used in all these gadget plays. All the stuff behind the line of scrimmage, that can easily be handled by Duvernay. He has the speed. he has the he has the best hands on the team, and Zay Flowers has proven the ability to be a deep threat. And in fact, Duvernay, when he was the number 2 and number 3 receiver last year before Bateman went down, was proving himself to be up to the task. So I think it's a numbers game, right? Like Duvernay versus Duvernay versus the opposing number 4 corner on the team is sometimes going to be a better matchup than Zay versus their number 1 corner. And we have to explore that. We have to be more willing to use Duvernay in this offense, like we're paying him.
I'm all for using Duvernay not only more but differently. I want to see Duvernay more out of the backfield. I think they give him more. I want to see him take over more of the jet motion responsibilities, and just like you, I want to see Flowers involved in more deep routes which peel off safety attention. And the Ravens have a lot of guys who are underneath receivers, and when you're having your one real deep threat run a lot of shallow routes, a lot of crossing routes, a lot of gadget plays, you're taking that away from the defense in terms of responsibility to look for it. So Bateman, I still have hope that he can give the Ravens a little bit of a deep threat there, but he's a route runner, and that's what he's good at. He's good at shaking a defensive back at the top of the route. And a lot of things about Bateman have not gone exactly perfectly this year, but part of it is the Ravens are just not utilizing their many speed weapons as I would hope, in terms of creating space for them, with the only really reasonable way to do that being Flowers.
Yeah, it's not going to be. We're not going to be happy with the results if the only 2 people that Lamar Jackson is targeting are Zay Flowers and Mark Andrews. We will come across teams that will be able to take those 2 guys away, and we need them to spread the ball more. So here's to hoping that goes in that direction.
My turn, right, with number 3?
Yep.
Okay. I tell you, one of the things I'm frustrated about is tight end usage so far this year. And Likely and Kolar, the 2 guys, have been left out of the offense, frankly. Kolar got a little bit of playing time early in the season, unfortunately had a bad drop. Likely also a bad drop among 4 targets, but he caught the other 3, 32 yards in total, 20-yard play is in there. It shouldn't have been the end of the world that this drop occurred, but then since week 3, he's had 0 targets. He, Duvernay, and Kolar were on the field a good number of plays this last week combined and had 0 targets. Monken came out of Georgia, and one of the things that he'd done is he'd still made good use of 12 personnel with Washington and whatnot, but they played a fair amount of 12 at Georgia, and we really have not seen that be deployed effectively. For the Ravens, they've used Ricard as a second tight end, sometimes in line. They've used other players, but they haven't really made effective receiving use of 2 tight ends so far.
Yeah, this was a tough one to leave off of. The negatives could have easily made it on there. I think we were all hoping for much more from these players. I think that Monken could definitely have some, early scripted plays to these to the tight ends. I mean, I think at least 2 games in a row he had a scripted play out to Likely, which was encouraging. But I mean, if they get enough reps together and there's good sort of trust capital built in there. I mean, imagine having all 3 of those tight ends in the red zone, just a bunch of giants, just bodying, the poor undersized defensive backs. It could really be an effective use of those weapons. I think Kolar has sort of underperformed as a blocker, so I think that's been a big part of it. But Likely, I think he, between last season and this season, has shown enough to deserve a shot. So hopefully they'll get those opportunities. So my next one, this has been a bit of a soapbox for me this season, is sort of the team decision making and messaging regarding injuries, and this is largely at the feet of John Harbaugh. I think that we've seen throughout the last 2 weeks that it's been a big mistake to bring Marcus Williams back at least as early as we have. And if it ends up being that Marcus Williams has to get surgery at the end of the season, and this is the level of play that we got out of him, and we elected that over him just getting surgery, early on and not impacting next season, I think that's going to, leave a lot of egg on the Ravens' face. And it's not just the Marcus Williams decision; it's also just sort of Harbaugh's messaging regarding some of these injuries. I think earlier, maybe in the offseason, he sort of made a comment about he sort of made an underhanded comment a little bit, on one hand complimenting Patrick Queen coming in and playing, but also seemingly kind of taking a jab at J.K. Dobbins, holding in. And even if that wasn't his intention, it would be shocking to me that he would be so oblivious as to the message there. And sort of that trend has continued a little bit this past week with Tyus Bowser. With his comments regarding Tyus Bowser, really makes it seem like Bowser is medically cleared and ready to play, but it's been Bowser's decision to not play. That's sort of what I'm reading in between the tea leaves of what Harbaugh said. And, even if that's true, I just don't see what benefit that has to the team, to morale, to the players trusting Harbaugh and being able to, be open and honest with the organization. Harbaugh just seems very loosey-goosey with how he's approaching the media and approaching these injury decisions. And it's been very disappointing to me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with this. I'm going to start by saying, I think that Harbaugh should attempt to mislead, generally speaking, as long as it's effective in terms of how prepared the Ravens are to go. So when he goes to the podium and he says, Johnny and Eddie and Gary are all ready to go, then I think that's fine in terms of the message you're sending to the other team. But you do really want to be cognizant about it. And what I would take from the Steelers game in particular is 4 guys returned in that game: Stanley, OBJ, Humphrey, and Williams. And those 4 guys all had a hand in losing that football game. And I think I do put a lot of the blame on the Ravens and probably Harbaugh in particular for saying things like, it's all hands on deck for this game. We need everybody back for this game. I'm pushing everybody to play. If you can't get ready for this game, don't even bother getting ready for the next 2 weeks, kind of thing. I don't know what he might have said. Okay. But I will say 4 guys very apparently got pushed back before they were really ready to play and didn't play well. None of them played well. It's the kind of thing that does really bother me. It is still a 17-game season. That Pittsburgh game was a great opportunity to jump ahead in the race. They should have won it anyway, even with those 4 guys playing poorly. So it hurts that much more that they did play, and that they didn't, help win the game from that respect. But the problem I have with Harbaugh in terms of the injuries is that I think he's pushing people back because of the general difficulty with injuries across the team. And obviously some of the handling of the margin of the roster has been very difficult with the number of walking wounded they have. And Saleh was active as the 9th offensive lineman for 1 game because the Ravens didn't have any other healthy bodies on the roster. It wasn't because they wanted Saleh to play. It's just, he's there. So I agree in on the 2 players you mentioned specifically. In terms of Dobbins, I think Harbaugh is best to shut his mouth in terms of anything about Dobbins. And he was clearly getting more and more frustrated with the J.K. Dobbins questions. And he came out with, you're going to have to ask J.K. about that. And now he's basically in the same spot with Bowser, saying, you're going to have to ask Tyus about that, or Tyus will tell you about that. He's got some decisions to make. When he says things like that, he also said the same thing basically about Ajabo. You're already flagging stuff you shouldn't be flagging, that the player has to make a decision between a season-ending surgery of some sort and deciding whether he wants to play through the pain and have surgery in the offseason or maybe not have surgery at all. You're already flagging something for the opponent where he's outside the bounds of where I'd like him to be talking. And honestly, the best comment in all these situations, and you as a lawyer, I know this, Slav, is your only comment should be no comment when you have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and the last thing that I'll say is, particularly with Marcus Williams in that situation, you're choosing Marcus Williams over an injured Marcus Williams over Geno Stone,
Yep.
who has played phenomenal football. Like that it's a no-brainer. You could tell just by, and the fact that Marcus Williams doesn't get pulled from the game, a quarter of the way in, all right, we gave it a shot. It's not working out. Geno, get in there. I think that could have made all the difference in the world. At least Ronnie Stanley, at whatever percentage he was at, was better than every other option they had. It's just baffling. So it's been a point of frustration for me.
So where are we? Is it my number 2 now?
Yes.
Okay. So my number 2 biggest frustration is Bateman. I think we've talked a little bit about it, but continual breakdown of trust with Lamar has been the problem here. 2 drops, obviously against the Steelers, and then he came back with the no attempt to make a play on the interception. Looked like he kind of got caught flat-footed. It was also very unfortunate that the defensive back had such an easy path behind him along the sidelines, and could tell that Bateman was flat-footed on the play, such that he didn't try and defend him, but he went for the football. Because it's not normal that you're, on the other side of the quarterback, the sideline side of the quarterback for the football. That's not where you want to be normally as a defensive back. If you have the choice, you'd be undercutting that route. But it was something that honestly, it happened. And when these things happen, they got to make Lamar think a little bit, whether he's doing it consciously or not, is, do I really want to put that ball up for Bateman to try and go make a play on it? He cost me an interception there. He cost me a couple of long plays. Otherwise, this is Andrews is over here, and I know he'll try, and I know he'll probably catch the ball.
Yeah. That was, I think it's a little bit of a, chicken or the egg thing on that play. It's a little hard. I tended to think that Bateman was just, by the time he turned around, he's flat-footed and just wasn't gonna, it maybe didn't look good. He should have tried to jump a little bit higher, but it's definitely a disappointing play. Not. Things just don't seem to be coming together yet with Bateman. And I'm a huge Bateman supporter, and I'm a huge believer in what he's going to be able to give the team this season, which is why he's actually my number 1 in terms of disappointment, because I was expecting him to really be the number 1 receiver for the Ravens this season.
I was too, honestly. Until we saw Flowers early in the preseason and just how he was getting utilized, I really thought Bateman would be the number 1 guy. He's their only real X receiver. The only thing I'm going to say that's going to go the other direction here on Bateman is that the outcome for Bateman and the bust tag is not a binary one. Okay, it's not a 1 or a 0. It's going to be somewhere in between. And yes, we're probably at a point right now where Bateman is unlikely to get his 5th-year option picked up, which starts at a frustrating level for a wide receiver you draft that high. You really hope that he'll earn that 5th-year option. But on the other hand, he's still got a year and a half and a little bit to play for the Ravens, where hopefully he's going to produce at a significant level. And they need to work to fix that. They just can't give up on this. And the fans who are saying that, the fans who want to give up on Bateman, that you're just not getting football here. You're not getting how you have to assemble a roster here and how you have to make it work. You want to be out front of the crowd and saying he's a bust. You're not giving us any new information. We're watching the same football games. We're seeing how crappily he's playing. We're seeing how lousy the results are. But on the other hand, you've got the one guy who can fix the X receiver position is certifiably Bateman, and he's the guy you have to work on this time. There's not going to be I don't think there's going to be another draft pick at wide receiver next year, even though the wide receiver room is a little short. I think they have other needs on this team, a tackle in particular, that they really are going to need to address.
Yeah, and if you're looking for something positive on Bateman, there's been a number of plays where Bateman has straight up been open and Lamar just, ended up going to another player. And I don't necessarily think that it's a a trust issue with Lamar. I do think he has more chemistry with Zay and with Andrews, but there have just been some plays that just kind of developed quickly. I think that this offense is potentially on the precipice of kind of it exploding a little bit, but which kind of goes to my number 2 disappointment, which is lack of explosive downfield plays on offense. And Bateman, who, like I said, is my number 1, is part of this. I sort of think that the Ravens need to make a much more concerted effort in taking some downfield shots. Downfield shots are incredibly valuable, regardless of whether you make the completion or not. If you have a second and short, take a shot downfield, right? That's a safe time to pick up potentially pick up a chunk play or pass interference, like Joe Flacco used to do with Torrey Smith. And even then, it makes the defense have to respect your willingness to take deep shots. And we're not even showing that on any reasonable level. We've talked about the average depth of target for Zay Flowers, the fact that we could be using Duvernay more in the backfield for either these gadget plays or these, passes behind the line of scrimmage to get some yak going. Take some deep shots with Zay. Let the plays develop.
I think part of the importance of what you're saying about taking some deep shots and building space. I mean, obviously, getting space going, getting Flowers out there, taking deep shots with him and with Bateman, for that matter, is something you can do anytime the opposing defense is lined up single high. All right, but you have to have 2 plays called in the huddle for Lamar to check to the deep shot play. So basically, all you need is pretty much a single word to have a check play be 2 verticals on the outside that are agreed upon under whatever terms they are. Maybe it's 4 words and they deal with different verticals. Somebody's running a post and somebody's running a straight 9 route or a corner. But you have to have that ready to go such that Lamar can call it when he sees that single high look. And that play, by the way, is one of the few that Lamar is going to have certifiably enough time to throw, because throwing up a 41 or 42 yard pass with good air under it only takes about 2 or 2.1 seconds to get that ball off. And that's about what those offensive tackles right now are giving Lamar in terms of the ability to step into a throw. So it'd be nice to see more of those taken. They're not, when thrown well, they're not easily defensible at all. And honestly, it's a play that's very hard to defense with a pressure, because the trajectory of the ball doesn't allow for a batted pass, and just in 2.2 seconds, it's very hard to get anybody into the backfield in Lamar's face.
Yeah, it pays dividends as long as it's not like a poorly thrown ball, in the sense that, and by the way, there are good misses when it comes to those passes, right? Overthrow to the sideline, that's a good miss, because that chances are that's not getting intercepted. If you throw a duck, that's a bad miss. That's a good chance that it'll get picked off. But so there's a lot of positive that can come out of it, regardless of whether it's a completion. And I just think that the Ravens are shooting themselves in the foot a little bit by not really attempting it more.
Yeah. All right, you have your number 1 was Bateman, right?
That's right.
So we're done talking about that. My number 1 is the other side of injuries, which is just, how do the Ravens get away from all the number that's happened? I don't think it's on anybody in particular, other than they may have some players that they have signed to long contracts and they are just hoping they work their way out of the injuries. And OBJ they only have for 1 year, but they had, it was a hope contract in terms of hoping he wouldn't get hurt, and he has. Dobbins has been a hurt for half his career prior to this year, and obviously he's missing basically the entire season this year. Stanley, obviously in the middle of a long-term deal, no way to disengage from the contract. The only strategy is hope, which really isn't a strategy at all. So you are in a position where you have some injuries that are just at risk of occurring. But they've had way more than that in terms of things. And the only thing that, differentiates this from either 2015 or 21 or 22 is the fact the quarterback hasn't gotten hurt. It's the big factor is Lamar is still healthy, but everywhere on the team they've had significant injuries, particularly on the offense, but also on the defense in terms of the edge injuries there, and now the safety problems they're having. It's the quality of players in addition to the quantity as well. And I think people will foolishly blame the organization, blame Harbaugh, blame the strength coach, blame anybody they can point a finger at in terms of what's going on. I really haven't heard a compelling argument yet on why it's some practice or procedure the Ravens have which has caused all these injuries. That's the part I have not yet heard a compelling argument for. Yeah,
it's just almost very just unfortunate timing. The Ravens had some high profile issues with Steve Saunders, who may or may not have voodoo dolls of the entire team and is sort of cursing them. But at the end of the day, they overhauled their staff and ostensibly their practices as well, because if somebody's going to implement the same exact practices, why would you keep them on, right? So they overhauled their staff from that perspective. And Harbaugh made a really good point. He's like, go back and look at the film. A lot of these injuries is just like dudes getting rolled up on. And it's just very unfortunate that we have had this statistical variance in favor of injury. Every year we're like, surely we'll regress to the mean at some point. And it just hasn't happened yet. We've been very fortunate that we've been able to weather the injuries on the defensive side, less so on the offensive side. But you're just hoping that we'll catch a few breaks and guys are going to get healthy. But at this point, I'm sick of reading about these conspiracy theories. Steve Saunders is gone; he can't hurt you anymore.
Hopefully not. Hopefully train the trainers and whatnot in a way that is keeping the myth alive. But anyway, I would love to hear it. I think the Ravens have to have all options on the table to try and fix it. And I had one really interesting group of brothers who were from Brazil or Argentina, I forget. I think Brazil. That were looking at heat maps that they could take by basically players in soccer dropping their drawers and going into a chamber that would detect where the muscles were overheated in their body, so they could detect early when muscle problems might occur ahead of time. So that would help with some soft tissue injuries, but it still doesn't help with these non-contact ACL type deals and all of the other roll-ups that are occurring on the offensive line and whatnot. I do not yet have anything from a training perspective that I think can fix that. You can teach your offensive linemen not to block your players into other players. You can teach them to let the quarterback take the hit at a certain point. That might be a legitimate reason, but I haven't really heard otherwise good compelling reasons. I mean, but yeah, and just look at sort of they're like, okay, Ronnie Stanley is. Whatever, he might not be right. Okay, let's keep him out of the preseason, keep him out of training camp. Well, why'd you keep Ronnie out of preseason training camp? Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Yeah. And same thing with JK. We kept him out of preseason, gets injured first game. Sometimes these things just happen. And I think I speak for all of us when I say we are ready to move on from them happening. All right. Well, a good show, a lot longer than we normally do, Slava, but I really appreciate it. It's always fun doing this show with you. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online. I'm on Twitter at Slava Cooperstein. That's SLAVAKUPERSTEIN. All right. Outstanding. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a Film Study short, hit me up. DMs are always open on Twitter. I promise I'll get back to you really quickly to talk about your idea for a show. For Slava Cooperstein, this is Ken McCusick saying goodbye, and we'll talk to you next week on One Last Thing.